manna from heaven, but then sales are slightly terrified by it because they don't have experience of using virtual platforms to build relationships, But then actually what's happening is the more sales savvy teams are realizing that virtual presents an environment which is incredibly integrated for marketing to sales, just depending on if you're using the formats in the right way and you're collecting and engaging with people in the right way, and you're encouraging shared experiences between salespeople and delegates, so that's forming the basis of a shared experience relationship, which salespeople can then take on after the event. So, what we're seeing now is, what certainly we've experienced is that, that seat at the strategic table is happening with one caveat, and that is really depending on the profile of the client. So, the bigger the client, the more strategists they have, and maybe the more protective those strategists are around the strategy. You start getting into kind of the middle-sized, whatever that means, for sized companies. Then there's more appetite, and certainly, the smaller ones that are doing much better, that don't have strategists in-house, are definitely asking for it a bit more.
Thank you. You used a phrase there, which event-based nurture programs. What does that mean? Sorry.
So I think people are pretty used to using sort of written content, infographics, thought leadership. What used to be kind of webinars, pre-recorded stuff, which has been put up there, which is, I think we've seen the death of webinars to a certain extent, because people have had to adapt and, to coin your loathsome phrase, which I'm always using as well, Chet, and pivot quickly as well. But what we're looking at now is how do we provide virtual experiences as an event? So if it's and I totally acknowledge that B2B sales funnels or customer purchase paths are incredibly convoluted, but let's just say it's a funnel. The top end of that funnel, where third party events play a brilliant role. What maybe we're seeing a little bit more of now is, because first party data is everything, people putting on their bigger, broader thought leadership events, and then having good talent and experiences within that, splitting out into topic areas, and then the middle area around that funnel, around looking more at interest, industry specific, solution specific. How do you change your format, your speaker, your hosts to cater for the needs of the business, and more importantly, the delegate at that stage? And then, towards the bottom of that, it's much more of a one-on-one consultative scenario for salespeople, for example. So that's the events experience-based nurture programs, rather than just throwing content out there and waiting for people to grab it.
Yeah. There's a funny comment from Dina, which obviously was about us being in poor relations. We only make coffee and do flowers, which does sum up where we were. But Hannah, have you seen a real collaborative, more so than ever before, spirit with working with clients? So it is more of a strategic partner than a supplier-client relationship. Have you seen evidence of that, or is it just all wishful thinking?
No, we're definitely seeing that it's far more integrated, and it's way more partnership approached, and that it comes with part of us being part of those conversations on the why. And one of the challenges with being added into kind of that earlier layer of the marketing mix is that all the other marketing channels have always known how to show their value and how to prove themselves and how to measure themselves, and therefore how to kind of create an ongoing campaign. And that's been a new challenge, really, for traditional event agencies, is, like you say, to charge for that workshopping time, to charge for expertise, especially if that's historically not something that's been happening. But then also to demonstrate the value of that, because that's the only way that we can really show our worth against all of the other marketing outputs. Of course, if they have film or radio and various other outputs from their marketing channels, that it's really well measured, and the value in return of that is really well understood. So that kind of means that we need to make sure that we shift up to that value-based approach as well. So we're definitely seeing more of a push in that direction, in terms of a longer, kind of more integrated campaign, as opposed to that standalone event moment. But I agree, then the real win for us is we that would then have all those things, plus, exactly as Ed's saying, and we're the experts in event delivery. So that's quite exciting. I think the only kind of difference for us is that the biggest challenge hasn't been quite live or virtual or hybrid or how should we, but ultimately it's just how do we get people to connect. We need them to connect to each other. We need to build a community. We need to have two-way conversation, and how are we going to achieve that? We're having that meeting a lot in terms of how that's done.
Do you think there's a danger here for agencies that used to do just maybe one element of the piece, say it was a venue find or the logistics delivery, or do you think there's a danger there that those businesses they really do need to start to offer a more rounded approach, or do you think there will be specialisms that will still fit in the market because we will revert back to those businesses just doing what they do and they do it really well?
Yeah, I mean, I don't like the term danger. Chet, I'm a massive fan of the underdog, and I'm a big fan of a hate pivot. But there used to be this idea that you should stay in your lane because you do this and you do this and you do this, and actually, the smaller, more agile agencies can move even quicker. And I want people to be excited by that prospect. There's a new space in the market opening up, and actually, it takes curiosity and enthusiasm to go after that sector of the market. You don't have to be somebody that's worked in that space for 10 years. You just have to be curious enough to find out about it. So I definitely don't think the smaller agencies should be thinking, wow, this shift is really difficult and that's not what we do. Also, that's the beauty of talent in our industry and recruitment, right? And contractors and partnerships. You don't have to know it yourself to be able to build it. You should bring in the talent that supports you. So I don't think there's kind of a danger of it. And also, I think there will be those traditional services return. I just think it's the agency's decision as to how soon they want to get moving versus whether or not they want to hold on for that kind of full return that allows those traditional models to come back in. But I think there's space for everybody to kind of find their way in. But I think clever and interesting partnerships for any of the agencies who don't quite have that kind of integrated knowledge is going to be exciting.
Yeah, there's a comment from Peter here who's actually just said exactly that collaboration. So this is on the stage chat. The collaboration between agencies or businesses with complementary skills could really help both parties, really, which we have seen some of actually take place within the sector, where the agencies that were mainly venue find have been taking partnerships with people who do understand virtual. Okay, let's move.
Just quickly on that point, I think the terrible fact of the matter is that unless you did virtual or understood how to then quickly do virtual at the beginning of this whole process, you effectively didn't have a business, because the worst possible outcome for events business is a global pandemic which stops people from meeting. Do you know so if you've been managed to stick in through it, brilliant. But it is about, it will come back. So those specialisms are going to be required. I mean, we need them. Everyone needs them, where we don't have them.
Yeah. Thank you, Ed. Let's move. I'm going to move the conversation on a bit to a bit around content. And Hannah, just tell us your background, because this kind of goes into the next question. But your background's teaching, is that right? Or
yeah, sadly, even more boring. It's theoretical education, but that's in terms of the practical application of education in terms of the way that we learn, as opposed to being as exciting as actually delivering it as a teacher. But the more kind of theory, 10,000 word based type side of educational theory. So it's how we connect, how sensory experiences change the way that we work and the way that we absorb information. And therefore, of course, in the last year, the major challenges that have come out of that.
I mean, what part of that is boring? That's fascinating. I mean, also incredible that you've been able to take something that you've studied and actually have a vocational and practical application of it. I mean, I did paleoanthropology, which is the prehistoric evolution of man, and the relevance is not quite there. But anyway,
yeah, I don't think taking this forward to be a party planner would have been the ideal direction my family would have taken with educational theory. But we are where we are.
So something you talk about in your reports is the authentic voice. Tell us what does that mean, and why is that relevant?
Yeah, sure. So we essentially break content down into two sides. So we have types of content in terms of the format that we're delivering in, and that's really, really important from accessibility and adoption. But one of the other things about adoption is the type of voice that you're hearing from. And what we spend a lot of time working on with brands is the idea that actually the CEO or the executive voice or the product lead voice, director of sales, isn't the voice that drives adoption. It's normally the voice that leads in terms of the inspiration and the positioning and where we should sit. But the highest level of adoption is actually heard from the authentic voice, which is essentially your matched practitioner level. So it's somebody else who's going through it and who is experiencing it and can actually talk about how they've adopted it and really honestly talk about the challenges as well. People don't actually want to join sessions to just hear about how wonderful the speaker is. They really want to also hear about how it's going to help them. And what we have a tendency to do is have presentations, so for brands, and we'll put together speakers that are speaking to other people in the room. There might be 4 or 5 of them at their level, and then there's 400 people at a different practitioner level, but we haven't put a matched practitioner on stage to actually talk about that authentic and that practical experience. So I do a lot of work in breaking down those voices, and there's kind of multiple different types of voices to make sure that we're maximizing adoption up and down employee level.
Wow, indeed. So, and very quickly, just tell us something that when we did the session was learning types. Tell us about the 3 learning types and why they're kind of relevant, important to think about.
Yeah, sure. So essentially, we all learn in one of, or for a small percentage of us, multiple ways, but one of 3 learning styles. So we either learn visually, auditorily, or kinesthetically. So visually makes sense. Anybody who kind of learns from an infographic, a presentation, anyone who can absorb something conceptual and be able to understand it. Audio-based learning isn't actually listening. It's people who learn better from conversation. So it's people who learn better by having an opportunity to break it down themselves and repeat it back to reconfirm their understanding. And then kinesthetic learning is people who learn by tactile learning, so physical touch and being in an immersive environment. So the reason it's so important is that is how people learn. It's how we design our early years education. It's how your children will learn. That is how we learn. And actually, we don't lose that as adults. But when we're then doing digital experiences, it's really easy to just fall in one of those and therefore alienate a different part of the audience. Now, the beauty of live is we became these experts in sensory experience, so how to really immerse people in the environment. And one of the best studies that come out in the last year about why children struggle so much with working from home kind of plays into our conference environments too. So if you put a child in the classroom, just by walking in that room, they understand that they're there to learn because they've done the emotional connection that says, this is where I learn. This is how I behave here, and this is where I learn. Then all of a sudden, we're putting them in their living room, their bedroom, their kitchen, their playroom, and we're expecting them to learn, the place that they associate with playtime and with rest. So losing those environments in terms of homeschooling is incredibly challenging, and parents can't change that, particularly if kids are kind of from 8 upwards. They've learned this is how I learn. And then as event planners, if we stick them in a conference room, it's the same. I walk in and I understand my behavior. I mean, I'm an adult, so I understand my behavior in most places, but I understand that it would be rude to be going through my phone while somebody is presenting. I understand that I'm there to do this. I've made a conscious choice to attend, which is the big difference. I've made my time to be here. Then all of a sudden we go on digital and we've lost all of that sensory environment and all of that connection. So what's really, really challenging is designing for all 3 learning styles. And we have a massive risk, which comes with a lot of learning accessibility issues, particularly for anybody who doesn't work very well in a autism, dyslexia type space, just being spoken to one way and not having the opportunity to have questions or to do anything tangible. We've just alienated them. So a lot of the work that I do is pushing really, really hard with brands to understand that and design for everybody.
Yeah, it is fascinating.
That's
as the
brilliant,
comment. Ed, you talk about in your report about events that are going to be reevaluated and shaped by participant needs. Hasn't that always been the case?
Yeah, 100%. I think off the top of my head, I can't remember the context of what that sentence was, but I'm sure it was within a bigger context, because you're absolutely right. I think if it's around the topic of what the future event looks like and how that is being, developed, that's, that is the golden question. But I think it's a golden question that we've got a lot of trend, insight, ideas, as we go towards. The bit that I'm interested in, and I've been thinking about quite a lot recently, is obviously the it's not an obsession, but is it people are trying to understand what hybrid means and what that's going to be like. And part of that, I can't help but think that hybrid is A plus B equals C. So C is hybrid because it's some sort of different beast from its two parents. But for some reason that doesn't sit too well in my gut, and I kind of think that hybrid is actually still is A plus B, beautifully intertwined. Because I think there are some there's some stuff that virtual is incredibly good for, and we've learned so much in the last year about how we're putting on virtual events and how we engage people and what the formats are and what experience we can give in virtual, and obviously we've got years and years of doing that in the physical as well. So it's there are parallels, but you can't really you can't compare them, and they're not competitive. I keep thinking of Saturday Night Takeaway, which has been on now with Anton Deck. That's a virtual event. It's hilarious. I love having a shared experience with my family and sitting down, and watching that. It's good fun, but the audience is virtual. What's the learning out of that? Amazing hosts, tying together great stories, experiences, other people's stuff. Roving reporters, Fleur East out in the countryside, finding people who've seen the kind of the rainbow lights. Well, it's live reporting. You don't get that at a physical event as such. You have to go onto screen to do that, and maybe television entirely is a virtual event. It's been going on for ages. So I think it's super. I think it's super exciting. I think it's there's no new norm because there's no norm. I think things will settle down, but ultimately, the consumer or the customer and the delegate will decide whether they want to go, whether they're within the right stage of the purchase path, where they have to go and feel and talk, not feel people, but feel the goods, go and talk to people about it, in physically, or is it that the VIPs are being invited to to those physical events, and there's some bigger experience that the money's thrown at to help at the end of the purchase cycle, or and maybe the people who are doing the research into products or experiences or topics are the ones that attend virtually because it's cheaper for them to do it, and actually that makes sense. So it is entirely, again, continue to be led by the delegates and what they need.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to ask one quick question on this to close this kind of learning content style to both of you, but a quick answer, please. What's your take on Clubhouse and its positioning in our world of the events world? Is it all hot air and echo chambers, or is there an actual purpose where Clubhouse actually could be a medium, a format? Hannah, to you first.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really exciting. I think, we haven't really had a chance to touch on digital natives and kind of that the way that they're, connecting and absorbing information. But I think that Clubhouse has a real opportunity to do something that LinkedIn didn't quite get. And I'm a huge LinkedIn fan in terms of building a network and for sharing content. But there's a digital native generation who just don't sort of get that model, because all they really want to do is be able to connect with each other, and that's a faster way for them to grow their network, is through just having conversations and kind of shared experience and building that. So I think Clubhouse has a lot of legs. I think what's also different from kind of when technology was launched sort of 10 years ago is we used to get a finished product, and now we're constantly seeing things being rolled out while they're still in beta testing and while they're developing, and then we add this, and that's also really, really interesting. And I think people are really responsive to that. Generally people love the kind of the FOMO piece of Clubhouse as well, like, have you had an invite, are you on it yet, it's iPhone only. So I think it will be really exciting, and I think as long as digital sticks, it has an opportunity to be integrated into events. But once we return to live, I want to be in the bar.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that, Hannah. I think that's I'd be interested. Podcasts they've exploded over the last few years, right? And that's that's an audio platform, whatever you want to call it, obviously, which is something that I was never into podcasts. Now I love them. I listen to them when I go running, for example. Well, I'll probably be listening to Clubhouse when I go running if it's a topic that I want to listen to and I want to be involved with. There's a Clubhouse after this, I think, as well, which is, I think that's a perfect use of it. Continue the conversation. Let's take it offline, but online, wherever else. I would be really interested to understand how how Clubhouse developed. Was it through demand, or was it because somebody some time ago developed a technology that very easily and cheaply saved audio conversations and could turn that into some sort of data, and thought, how do I monetize this? I know, actually, let's create this exclusive invite-only environment, get some influencers in, start talking about stuff. Suddenly we've got this new platform that everyone's going to be talking about, and there's some sort of exclusivity, and that's going to happen. So, was it demand-led or was it product-led? I don't know. That would be interesting to know. But I think, like many of these things, or all of these things, it'll be the people like you or I who are sitting on it and listening that, will gauge the levels of audience that they get. Ultimately.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I've done a poor job of keeping to time, so I do want to touch on digital natives and people very quickly for the last 5 minutes. And Ed, staying with you, one of the things you talked about was digital natives, and that event managers now, well, they used to have a role of logistics and maybe creative predominantly, but now they have to become, as in your words in your report, communication experts, or they will flourish and have flourished if they've been able to adapt to that. Do you see that as being a key asset for them to have as a skill set to really grow in this world? What's your take on it?
Yeah, definitely. And you're alluding to a really nice point that came out of the research. There were many very, very strong positives that came out of the report, actually, and one of which was repeated by I think 3 or 4 of the people that I had qualitative interviews with, who said that some of the people that were really shining were the younger people within their business who now had a voice, were digital natives. They were much more flexible and adaptable and had digitally minded solutions to be able to carry through into the marketing. So, the people obviously got their jobs there because they were good in the first place, but actually, rather than having this sort of this higher hierarchy structure, which was based on, either if you've got a louder voice or you've been there for a longer or you're more senior, people were searching out digital natives to understand, what they thought. And the other point that you made there is event personnel were having to upskill incredibly quickly from going from kind of analog events to digital events, and suddenly they were required to being experts in technology and engagement, and were working with the IT teams much more closely. And if they didn't learn quickly, I'm afraid they weren't going to succeed. So the learning was forced on them. But I think the digital natives, it was an opportunity to shine that was coming through on the report.
Yeah, thank you. And Hannah, almost closing just with you, you talked about this at the early stage of almost when we started, about how younger people have embraced also, the changing environments and all of that, really taking ownership of their space, their work. How do you see this continuing? Are we all back into offices? Is it all going to be flexi working? What do you see the makeup?
Yeah, I think the great thing that we see about that kind of that younger pool of talent is exactly what Ed's saying. They're really solutions focused, and one of the big things that's come out in the last year is getting to solutions quicker, because we haven't had the same amount of time to strategize and workshop and plan and then test and retest and play out every scenario. So whether or not it's digital or whether or not it's just their approach to work, that kind of ability to move from problem to solution, I think, is really exciting. I think we're definitely also seeing some kind of pressure when hiring and things for people to have slightly more commercial awareness, even wherever they are, kind of in employee scale and where they're applying for, just some awareness of how their position fits into the agency and how the agency fits into the industry is a different challenge. So particularly people are far less siloed in their roles and more kind of integrated in where the agency is going. You know, particularly at an agency of our size, we really need everyone to be behind where we're going and how we're going to get there. So that's kind of the big shift. I think the exciting thing for people generally, and it's definitely a model that we've adopted, is hiring the talent that can bring that and can challenge ideas. And I know that most of our great ideas are because they've been challenged from the ground up. At least definitely no one that works for me is just kind of going, yes, no problem, etc., etc. We're kind of being challenged all the way up, and that's really exciting. So I think that's kind of the big shift for people, and when they're hiring and interviewing at the moment, that's the thing. That's kind of the energy that people are looking for bringing. In terms of returning to the office, at least for Cheerful 21st, it's definitely too early to say, and 100% too early to commit industry-wide before we've updated the team. But we definitely have the intention of getting people back together. Yeah.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Ed, for sharing today. There's so much more that I wanted to go to, but we've run out of time. Congratulations on your hire, Holly Mills, who's joined as Head of Incentives at Cheerful 21st. So now please do make your way to sessions where there's 2 workshops that you can take part in. Hindsight is 2020, and the other one, which is Starting Back Better, a green return. Thanks, everyone, for listening, and we'll see you back here after the break at 3:45 for the next session. Thanks, Ed. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Hannah.
Thank you.